Okay, everyone, so today we are just going to be talking about parts of a lesson plan, but for Education Academy. So all of you have taken preschool, maybe a few of you haven't. However, the Education Academy lesson plan is much different than preschool. It has a lot of the same components like objectives and procedures. However, it's a bit more detailed and requires a little bit more work. This is actually the template that is used at Illinois State University, which is why we use it here at Leiden. We feel that it is the best way to prepare you for life after Leiden and what lesson planning really is. So these are the two side by side. So on the left, you can see preschool. You all have seen this before. That's your normal template that we used all of last year. It's a little bit more simple. And then on the right, we have our Education Academy one. If you look at it closely, it's basically the same thing. It's just laid out a little different, has a little bit more detail. You can see that we have 3 objectives still. The subject, your name, the date, motivator, and then some procedures. So the layout's a little bit different, but the goal is the same. With the Education Academy lesson plan, there's a few components on page 2 that we did not do in preschool. So preschool was like a level 1. We're getting moved up to level 2 here in lesson planning. So in this video, we're just going to talk about all of the components in the Education Academy lesson plan. And then on your own, you're going to fill out a little note sheet about each of these components. So the very, very top of the lesson plan is just the information about the class. So you can see this is my old one from back in my student teaching days, but you can see I have my name, the grade, the subject, the date, and the number of students. So this is super important because usually when you're handing out a lesson plan to someone as a teacher, it means that someone's coming in to observe you teach, or they want to know what you're teaching. Therefore, having this information is very important. If my principal came in the room, I think it's important for her to know what grade everyone is in, what I'm actually teaching, and how many kids. So that's why we have the information at the top. The objectives portion, as we know from preschool, objectives are super important because it basically tells us what our kids are going to learn and what we want them to do by the end of the lesson or by the end of the unit, depending on the kind of lesson plan. So here I have 3 different objectives for my lesson, and just from this alone, the person who's coming in to either observe me teach or just take a look at my lessons can kind of see what my class is going to look like for that lesson. So the next part, this is like the big meaty part of the lesson plan. So this is all of your different procedures, but you can see it doesn't really say procedures. It's set up in a T-chart. So on the left, we have our content. This is more of an outline. So you can see I have QT. That's what we used to call a quick thought when I was student teaching. So that was just like a little prompt to get them started. So the first thing they did was the QT, and then I moved on to a presentation. And then we talked about adapting your classroom. So you could see that part on the left right here. That's just a basic outline. And then when you look at the right, these are the more detailed notes about what I was doing. So if you look at QT, that was my quick thought, and I go over here, this tells the reader of my lesson plan exactly what prompt I'm using, why it's relevant, and then like what else I'll be doing during that time frame, and then how long it's going to take me. So I gave 10 minutes for that little warm-up activity and for me to check in with other students. So that's just my very first part. Now we move on to the second part of our little chart, which is we're talking about learning disabilities. So here, look, you can see that Teresa, Stephanie, and Laura were giving a presentation. And then you look over on the right, and it explains exactly what my students are doing. So it says preschool students sit on the carpet and have presenters holding the laptop and presenting. So that's what they were doing. So just taking a look at this, you can kind of get a very clear picture of what my classroom looked like in that moment. So this needs to be super important. When I'm helping students with their lesson, I always want them to think of like the left is just like an outline and the right is the details. You could see at the headers, it tells you exactly what you need. So all of your tasks, what you and your students are doing, some questions you plan on asking, because it's always good to have some planned questions, and then how long it's going to take. So the next portion that we're going to be talking about is standards. I require 1 to 2 that match your lesson, and then we link it onto the template. So what's important about standards is standards drive your planning as a teacher. So if you're a second grade teacher, there is a list of standards out there of all the things that your kids should know by the end of second grade. You use these standards to guide your lessons. Every content has a set of standards that they use. Therefore, it's super important. So you can't just, although it would be amazing, you can't just say like, I want my kids to learn about rocket science in first grade, because there's a set of things that they actually need to know by the end of second grade or first grade. So these standards just kind of help you plan. And again, it's another goal for your students by the end of the lesson. So someone looking at it, they can see, okay, so I want them to determine central ideas or conclusion of a text. So when they're watching me teach or when they're looking at my lesson, they should be able to see that within my lesson plan somewhere. Is she actually having them determine central ideas or make conclusions? That's something that someone would look at if they're watching you teach or looking through your lesson plans. Materials. Everyone knows this from preschool. So basically, this is just what you need to do the lesson. So got to be specific, and you have to think about it as if you weren't there teaching it. So if you need glue, scissors, you need to write all of that down. Because say a sub walked in and they need to look at your lesson plan, and it might be common sense to you that you would need tape or glue or something small, but if they didn't plan the lesson, they probably don't know. So you have to be very specific at this point. All right, here's some more fun new stuff. So resources, I don't have anything in that bin because I wasn't using anything off of the internet for this lesson. However, if I was using a YouTube video or showing a short clip from somewhere else, all you have to do is copy and paste the link into that. So that's super easy. Accommodations. So this is what you would change for a special ed student. So I had a student in my class, you can see, that had a learning disability. I have it written right here under accommodations. And then basically what I did was write how I was going to accommodate that student and her IEP. So I chose to break up the information into chunks for the student and provide her a guided copy of the article. Some of this can be preferential seating. So if you have a student with a vision impairment, they're just sitting in the front of the room. Maybe they have bigger text on their computer. There's a bunch of different things. Sometimes you don't have to make any accommodations for students, so it's okay to write none. And then contingency plan. Anyone that was in preschool knows that this happens all the time. Sometimes you run out of time. Sometimes you didn't have enough time. So these are just little plans that you can, what you can do to shorten or lengthen your lesson. So it doesn't have to be anything crazy like an extra worksheet or an extra project. Sometimes it could just be questions. So for the lengthen one, you can see that I have here, have students start looking for books in our classrooms that fit the themes. That's kind of what we were talking about for the second part of the lesson. So that's perfect. Gets them up and moving. And then the shorten, don't have the students read and record yet. So that would be like, oh no, I'm running out of time and I still have half the lesson to do. It's not ideal, but that's totally okay. It happens all the time. So you just have to have a way to shorten it and still make it feel normal rather than just like the bell ringing and being like, oh no, we didn't get through everything. Then the next part is associated visuals. So this is where you list any handouts or any kind of visual resources that you plan to use. So I had down here, you can see they were using their iPads, a bunch of different children's books, the project description, an infographic, and preschool scenarios. So we had a lot. This was a 90-minute class period. So we had a lot of things to hand out to the kids during that time. So again, you put that there in case, again, you have a sub maybe, or if someone just wants to see what's going on in your lesson. So that's all we are doing for today. So now after you watch this video, you're going to have to go through and watch it again and kind of take notes on the note sheet provided that you can find on Schoology.